Welcome to the Recovery Stories podcast, bringing you stories of hope, healing, and triumph over the bondage of addictions, mental health struggles, trauma, and dysfunctional family systems. Our courageous storytellers have chosen to live their journey out loud in order to show others that they don't have to suffer in silence. The stories you will hear are raw, real, and may involve graphic and triggering content. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's Rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or are ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. My name is Patrick Custer and I'm your host. We are so glad that each and every one of you have connected with us, either if you're watching or listening on any of the various platforms. Just want to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way at the beginning of this. We do this podcast free of charge and do not collect any money or support or advertisements because we want to help the recovery community. So it is a service. What we ask of those of you who are appreciating these episodes and whatnot is to give us a review, rating, star, whatever it is on whatever platform you're on. If it's a follow, give us a follow. It really helps everything out so that we can continue to be successful in spreading recovery and raising voices and breaking stigma. So without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce to you all our special guest today from Nashville, Tennessee. He is a public speaker, musician, recovery coach, and person in long-term recovery himself, David Hampton. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to be with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. It's been a long time coming. I'm so glad we're finally here.
Yeah.
So, like I always like to do, I just want to ask you to start from the beginning. Where were you born? Family, all the things.
Yeah. Well, I was born in a little town in Illinois called Mount Carmel. It's just on the Wabash River, very, very small little town. I think even today it's only maybe about 9,000 people or something. I may have that wrong, but sorry, Mount Carmel, if I do. But I grew up in Evansville, Indiana, southern Indiana, just across the line from Kentucky. My parents moved there when I was about 2, so. My upbringing was in Midwestern, Southern Indiana, a good kind of, I would say, working class town, not a huge, metropolis at all, but I grew up there and was raised in a home by, parents who loved me and did a lot of things in their lives to break cycles that they had come from. And that was a good thing for me. It was a good upbringing, and the hitch with me was when I was about 5, I started showing abilities of being able to do music in a way that maybe other kids weren't demonstrating yet. And I could pick out melodies on my grandmother's piano. I could hear something and play it back in a, not perfectly certainly, but I began to show this ear that everybody in my circle at that time called a gift. I was raised in a very religious, conservative Christian experience, which I've since maybe moved apart from in some ways, but in my upbringing in the world that I was in, it was very much attributed to God that, these things were a gift, and I believe they were in whatever respect. And so my parents decided to get me music lessons. And so I started taking piano lessons from the church organist. And I studied with her for about 4 years, and then I went and played this little audition at University of Evansville Preparatory School of Music. They held every year. You go in, you play your classical piece, you get critiqued, And the professor that judged the competition, it was not really a competition, but the evaluation. And he came out after I was done playing, and he went to my mom. I was about the fourth grade at this time, and he went to my mom, and he asked her to come into the room and asked me to wait in the hallway in these little, studio rooms in college. And that had never happened to me in any situation. It made me a nervous wreck. And my mom came out, and she was a little puzzled looking. And so we got in the car, and on the way home, she said, "How would you like to study at University of Evansville Preparatory School of Music? And we would move away from this teacher you have right now, because this man believes that you've kind of topped out where you're going to be, but he sees a lot of potential. And he also says, by the way, that you don't really read music that well. You're doing a lot of this by ear."
That was going to be my next question. I played 13 years of classical piano, and I got in trouble constantly because my thing was I played by ear as well.
Yeah,
And all of my teachers wanted me to get accustomed to
totally.
reading music, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it.
Exactly. My ear was much better than my reading, and quite frankly, I liked some of my versions better.
Did they ever require you to, when learning music, to not hear the song
Oh yeah,
first? And you,
yeah. That became the strategy.
that's the worst.
Yeah.
I man, nothing made me more angry than that.
Totally. It's like, well, you can't just, it's like asking me to see a movie and not even telling me what it's about.
Yeah.
Like, you can't expect me to do that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was very much that way. And so this preparatory school, I would take 2 piano lessons a week from a college professor, and I would take one group music class a week as music theory and all of that. And so that sounded awesome to me because I wasn't excelling in school, especially. I think I'm not smart person, but I'm kind of an alternative learner. And then there were other things at school that go along with being a kid in glasses who plays the piano that was not a pleasant experience. A lot of bullying, a lot of name calling. I didn't fit in my neighborhood really well. A lot of the people in my parents' neighborhood at the time were, working in different blue collar capacities, and nothing wrong with that at all. But that was the reality. And so we didn't have air conditioning, and I would practice, Chopin with the screen door open, and it let the whole neighborhood know that I was vastly different than the rest of these guys that were out, doing whatever kids did after school. But I share all that because it created a really great um, um, work ethic in me for things that I wanted to do, that I was passionate about. It was extremely expensive for my parents to send me there, and it created a lot of anxiety in me to achieve. So
Mhm.
that all rolled into a fourth, fifth, sixth grade kid, started to manifest itself in different ways. And so I was pretty anxious. I was pretty unhappy at school. I felt very different for a lot of reasons. And but my upbringing in church would give me this outlet to use music and go in and perform and play and do that kind of thing. And so I sort of got this big payoff. We attended a large church, and by the time I was 13, I was making $50 a week playing music for the Sunday night service or something. And, other kids were mowing lawns for less money. So I thought, well, this music thing might actually be lucrative. But I took my first drink when I was 13. My parents didn't drink. My dad had a client that gave him a bottle of bourbon that they kept in the foil box in the back of the pantry, which I always joke that is where Baptists keep their liquor, but behind the baking goods.
Yeah.
But they stuck it back there, and they didn't know what to do with it. There was this big discussion about it. Do we keep it? Do we give it away? We can't give it to somebody. That'd be sinful. So
Hmm.
all this kind of stuff. And so one night my parents went to a Christmas party. I was 13. My mom had these little mallard duck tumblers that were in the cabinet. She called them juice glasses, but they were really on the rocks glasses that she had gotten. And so she had those up there. I pulled one down and I filled it with ice because my aunt and uncle, who weren't Baptist, had a really cool zebra skin bar in their family room. And I had watched them mix a drink. And so I didn't know how much booze to put in this thing, but I filled it about half full of Kentucky bourbon and the other half of 7 Up. And I went in the family room. The Christmas tree lights were on. Charlie Brown's on TV. And I started to sip it. And everything I'd been told about alcohol up to that point, I realized was really not true for me. I
Mm,
didn't find it to taste horrible at all. I actually
mhm.
liked the taste. I enjoyed that warm feeling when it went down. I enjoyed the awe that it gave me after that. I didn't get sick. I didn't act unbecomingly. I didn't have unwanted outcomes at that point. And
Right.
and all I knew was this felt like a warm hug from God that I had waited for my whole life, and
Oh,
this
man.
was going to be the way I spent a chunk of my adulthood, because I can't imagine this being bad, wrong, immoral. I couldn't imagine why anybody would lie to me about it or not want me to do it.
You just described exactly my first drinking experience.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, we both come from a very similar background, and
Mhm.
the truths that that I believed about the world and about drinking and
Mhm.
everything like that, and what it was like when I actually chose to drink.
Mhm.
It's like all of this fell away, right?
Oh yeah.
That
Yeah.
and um, I think many people have that experience with their first drink of feeling calm. All
Hmm.
the positive feelings we can feel when drinking alcohol, but coupled with that conservative upbringing, strict viewpoint,
Hmm.
black and white thinking,
Hmm. Yeah.
it starts to mess with your trust and your, um, what have I been taught? All the things you
Yeah.
just said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it
So,
called everything into question, and it took me a lot of years and therapy later on to figure out how those questions were really
mm,
playing out in my life, and some of them it took me a long, long time to finally be willing to address them honestly. But it did. It was like, I don't feel anxious anymore. I don't feel perfectionistic anymore. I don't feel uh, like I'm not okay. I don't feel shame in the toxic way. I just feel good. And why wouldn't I want to feel good? Um, as opposed to all this other stuff.
yeah.
I had an ulcer at 15 and was, taking hits of Malox in my locker between class,
Wow.
because, and that's also attractive to people. And so I had this anxious, very perfectionistic, very buttoned up. God was always pissed and I was always trying. And
Mm,
all this stuff. I'd even had people tell me, as a kid in the music realm that, if you don't use this for God, he'll take it away from you. And 'cause he gave it to you, he can take it away tomorrow. So I thought, well, shit, I better, I better start doing the music God
right.
likes then, because this is not something I want to go away. This is part of me.
Yeah.
But fast forwarding a little more, I started playing in a music group that traveled in the summers from the time I was about 15 until I went to college. And I met the woman in that group that would eventually become my wife. I was 17 when I met her and she was 20. And I got married when I was 3 weeks from 21, which I don't recommend, but that's what I did. There was a lot about me that was unresolved at that time, and it showed up. And eventually, in the marriage, I started feeling like I could drink successfully and drink more regularly, and I was embarking on a career that I wanted to move to Nashville.
Hmm.
So I ended up with a couple of songwriting deals. We moved to Nashville in 1980, 87, 88. And my wife got pregnant the first year we were here. So my daughter was born in 89. And then in about and things were starting to happen for me musically here, and that which was, again, a gift, given the people that come here to pursue it. And
Yeah.
so I was playing for artists on the road. I was gone a lot. I had a couple of writing deals. Things were moving. And in 1994, Trisha, my wife, was diagnosed with MS. And she had at that point, what they were calling a relapsing remitting form of MS, where it kind of comes and it goes. You'll have periods of, anything from vision to mobility to whatever showing up, but it doesn't stick around. It runs its course and it rolls off, and you don't have it again for a little bit, or not acutely. But her situation was starting to leave her with more residual effects every time she would have a flare up or an exacerbation of the MS. So what would happen is she'd get these flare ups, and they would give her steroids to bring her back. And then they had to give her stronger steroids, and then they had to give her IV steroids. And she was losing a little bit of mobility with every episode. And so by the time, by the time my daughter was 5, Trisha was starting to need a cane and some things that
Wow.
people our ages at that point don't typically need.
Yeah.
And so she was going from, a cane to a walker to eventually a wheelchair. And I needed to get off the road. I needed not to travel. So I took a position at the church we attended in Franklin. It was a kind of a large church at the time. It was sort of a music church. And it was a really good opportunity for me to use music, my arranging, my songwriting, and the talent pool that we had access to. It was a ridiculous amount of talent. I always tell people, if you screw up a church music job in Nashville, you're an idiot, because you've got way too much talent at your disposal to do anything else.
Yep.
Um, but what happened as Trisha got sicker, I got sicker, because her disease was starting to take off, and I was starting to really panic. I was becoming a single parent in a lot of ways. I ended up having to be the person that took my daughter to school in the carpool, and I had to be the room mother dad that brought the cupcakes, and I had to be a lot of things, come and videotape the programs, because Trisha couldn't necessarily always go. And so I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I was just trying to survive, but I was angry and resentful, fearful, and I deserved to drink, and I firmly believed that. It wasn't that maybe I could drink. It was, no, I deserve this. And a victim with a sense of entitlement will do anything, I've decided.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yes.
And so I was a victim with a sense of entitlement, and
Yep.
that was dangerous. And it was dangerous for me, and it was not helpful to my family. And so I found myself, by about the year 2000, by around 2000, I had quit trying to quit. That didn't go well either, because I had tried all the usual things everybody says. I'll only drink weekends. I'll only drink when people come over. I'll only drink beer and wine. I'll only drink if I'm, whatever, if I go out. And none of that worked. And so I just started drinking without any real reservations about it. And I drank every day for 5 years, some of it secretly, some of it out in the open. When I was at home, I didn't really care who saw me, but when I was out, I was trying to be careful. But I was one of these people that if I went to a wedding reception, I had to drink before I went, so that the amount I could drink at the reception didn't just piss me off, and I would drink the rest of the way I wanted to drink when I got home, because
Isn't that funny? It's something that non-alcoholics, they look at people like us and go, what? Whenever I share that part of my story, and I talk about getting invited to dinner parties where, there would be a set amount of alcohol that was
Yeah.
available. Like, these people didn't have a bar at their house, and what was
Right.
available was maybe, a bottle of wine to share
Right.
amongst everyone.
It's just illustrating
Man,
about.
there's nothing like a limited amount of alcohol to piss an alcoholic off,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's the worst.
Yeah, and
So,
this is gross, but when we would have people over for dinner and we were serving wine, when I would clean up after dinner, I wouldn't let
yeah,
anybody help me so that I could marry all the wine into one bottle, I mean, into one glass
of
that's already
course.
finished and drink it, because
Yeah.
I'm like, I could not pour out alcohol, you know.
Yep.
And in fact, when I finally relented, and I'll get to this, but went to AA, the first thing my sponsor asked me, he said, "Do you have alcohol at home?" And I'm like, "Well, hell yeah, I do." you know. And he's like, "Pour it out." And I'm like, and he said, don't throw it away, because you'll go get it, because I'd done that numerous times. I'd been in
Yeah.
dumpsters gathering up booze I had thrown away the night before because I had overreacted. And so the hardest thing in the world was to pour it down the drain.
Mhm.
But yeah, I had a lot of things that were starting to happen that weren't helpful to me anymore, and
Mhm.
I was not able to do my job the way I wanted to. I had memory lapses. I drank in many, many, many blackouts. Just all the stuff. I didn't remember talking to people. I peed in the floor more times than I wanted to admit. And I live in a house with two women. One's disabled and one's 16 or 15 years old. And odds are they're not the ones that did it. So you
Right.
have to kind of own
So
it.
how hard, mm, you have an added level of, there's your normal level of shame and guilt that accompanies any addiction.
Hmm.
But when you hold a position of power and influence in a church, um, how difficult is it to face that you may have a problem that is not looked at as okay
Yeah.
to have,
Yeah.
and that your behaviors are not in line with that of someone
Hmm.
in the position you were in?
Hmm.
Like, what level of how much did that, I guess, push you to keep going rather than stop and ask for help? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Propel you in that same direction.
Yeah. That's a really good question, because I think that for a long time, like with a lot of things, for a lot of people, I kept thinking that God would take it away. God would
Mhm.
change me. God would allow me to drink like a normal person if I just did it right. And um, in a lot of religious circles, and a lot, especially when you when you make your living at Jesus, there's a lot of expectation that your life is going to look very different than other people's, and mine really didn't. Mine was pretty problematic,
Yeah.
and so I felt this responsibility to. I felt like it would be bad for business if I told people what was really going on with me,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
the real reality was that I was conflicted about a lot of things, because I was conflicted about my belief system. The deeper I got into the work I did, I didn't altogether feel like I was on the same page, but I didn't know how to really navigate that. And so when I finally got sober, and a great friend took me to my first AA meeting. And I went to a lot of AA meetings before I stopped drinking. But I get in this 12-step community, and I hear people telling my story over and over and over. People who looked like me, who had better jobs than me, who made more money than me, were all telling me the same thing. And I realized that I was not that unique.
Mhm.
I had some things in my situation that weren't like everybody else, but I wasn't quite that unique. And ultimately, I surrendered to the fact that this is what's true, and this is what's real, and I said it out loud, so I'd have to deal with it. And And I remember the first meeting I ever addressed myself as an alcoholic. I said, I'm David and I'm an alcoholic. And that's the first time I've ever said this out loud. And the whole room erupted in applause. And I thought that, and I, of course, I wept. And I thought that has never happened to me.
Mm.
We don't do that in the church. People confess their sins and then we go, man, me too. That's great. Thank you. We go, well, here's how to fix it or
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
and so my first sponsor did me this huge favor. He said, do you want to be sober? And I said, well, yeah, I don't want to drink anymore. And he said, well, that's not what I asked you. He said, I asked you if you want to be sober, and I want to make sure you understand what that is, so that when we're embarking on this thing that we're going to do together, you know what's being asked of you. He said, being sober is reassessing everything you think you know about you, yourself, God, your world, why you do what you do. And we're going to take it all apart. And there's going to be this sort of emotional autopsy. And I just want you to be prepared that you're going to have to face some things about yourself that have nothing to do on the surface with your relationship to alcohol, but they're going to have everything to do with how you justify it.
Mm.
And, I thought, oh man, this is getting a little crazy, that I just want to know how not to drink. I wanted,
Yeah.
you know, after I got past the part where I wanted, the AA plan B, where I just could drink successfully like other people,
Mhm.
maybe, found that they don't have that lane in the program. So it was something for me that, it absolutely changed my life in so many ways. But what happened for me was, as I got deeper into the program, deeper into 12-step work, working with the sponsor that I had, um, I realized that being sober was the most disruptive thing I'd ever done. And I think we forget to tell people that sometimes, that sobriety is really disruptive. The world is loud. It's about 3 inches from your face. The things that you've trained people to be in your life, you no longer need them in that way. And we have to
Mm.
retrain them how to treat us.
Ooh, can you say that again?
Yeah, the people that we've trained to treat us a certain way in our lives, we no longer need them in that capacity, and we have to retrain them how to treat us, and that a lot of them aren't excited about the trip, actually, you know.
Man, that is a nugget right there.
Well,
Like, that is a nugget of truth, and I've never heard it put that way before, but
mhm,
I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that, because there's a powerful punch in what you just said,
mhm.
for sure.
Well, that was my experience with
Yep.
that, and I remember coming in, with all my great epiphanies and opinions, and one day it was as simple as, Trisha was still able to be up and around, and she was in the office at home and at the computer, and I had seen a bill for cable, for the first time, and I don't know when. And I looked at it and I said, God, when did we start paying this for cable? And she goes, oh, about 3 years ago, welcome to the party. um, you know, and I'm like, God, that's a lot. And she said, well, they've got other plans, but you had other plans when we were getting the program. So that, if you want to weigh in, that's great. But the just silly stuff like that, all
Yeah.
the way to, I don't need to be managed anymore, and I don't need you to make my decisions for me anymore, or to assume
Mhm.
things on me anymore. And that was across the board with a lot of relationships. But one of the things that also happened to me was that I was sober enough to know that I was on the wrong bus in the work that I did.
Mm.
And I was keenly aware that there were things that were probably pretty important that I didn't hold to, in that system. And nothing, no, not throwing any rocks at that. It was, the people there loved me and they were supportive, and that was a wonderful, wonderful thing. Um, but I didn't hold to some of those ideas, and really couldn't, and stay sober and admit it, to myself. And so I went on this kind of a spiritual quest. I went up to a monastery the first year I was sober, up in
Which
southern
one?
Indiana, Saint Meinrad.
Okay.
It's just on the other side of the line in southern Indiana. It was a
Mhm.
Benedictine monks settled this little community. It's a very cool place, and I had a great spiritual guide, Father Bennett, who just kind of took me through a lot of things I was thinking about and questioning, and gave me permission to just not be okay with everything, you know,
Mm.
and really kind of began to. I went for once a month for about 6 months up there, and it began to.
Was that the first time in your life you ever felt like you got to take inventory of the faith that you had inherited
Mhm,
since birth
absolutely.
and decide what was yours and what was what you actually could believe with your full heart, not just because you were told
Hmm.
this is what it is and this is how it has to be?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they weren't trying to convert me or recruit me or or correct me, for that
Yeah,
matter. They just wanted me to know the God of my understanding better,
sure.
and accept maybe a version of God that up till then had really been a really foreign concept to
Hmm.
me. And so, as I immersed myself in more of that and began to read and experience and join other groups that believed more in line with things that are a little more broad and universal, I again was really conflicted, and so I was like, dang, now I thought life would get easier after I got sober, and it really, for a bit of time, got a little more complicated.
Mm.
Trisha got sicker. She spent the last 7 years of her life in a hospital bed at home. I was a skilled nurse who was really a piano player for a living, and
Yeah,
bless her heart, I had to learn to do things that people trained me to do that I never planned to do ever.
yeah.
And I learned a lot about caregivers and caregiver burnout. And there's a huge propensity for people who are in caregiving roles in families to develop some kind of addiction or unwanted behaviors.
Mhm.
And it's more likely than not. And but it's probably one of the most isolating things that happens. I remember telling Father Bennett one day, I said, how do you live with the fact that some days you pray for somebody you love to die, you know,
Mm.
and that you can, tell God that He can take either one of us today. It doesn't really matter. Just put us out of really this suffering that is
Yep.
front and center here. And those were the kind of things that I could admit that as a sober person that I couldn't have admitted in the
Right.
drinking. The things moved forward. In 2013, Trisha passed away
Mm.
from complications of progressive MS, and we had hospice care for about 6 months that came to the house before she died, and that was a whole shift in my understanding too. Those people are saints. I mean, they
Yeah.
they go where nobody wants to go,
Yep.
and I couldn't imagine going through that experience without that support. But the interesting thing is, my therapist, around the time Trisha was in hospice, said, "Have you thought about what you're going to do and how you're going to process the anxiety that is going to come after Trisha dies?" And I said, her name was Marilyn. I said, "Marilyn, you're good and everything, but I said, I'm not going to feel anxious. I said, I'm going to grieve. I'm going to be sad. I'm going to feel relief. I'm going to feel all kinds of things, but anxiety is not going to be on that list." And she said, "Well,
Mm.
I understand you feel that way, but here's the thing. When Trisha passes away, you and all your reasons for staying in a job that you've had to this point,
Mhm.
for not making a
Mhm.
career move, for you need the insurance, all the things you
Yep.
told
Yep.
yourself in this." She said, "All that's going to be gone. You're hiding behind the skirt of this role you've had to play, which is valid, but not going to be necessary anymore. Is going to bring you some anxiety because all of a sudden you have choices
Hmm.
that you haven't had. You
How'd
know,
you receive that?
it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I thought, well, no, I haven't thought that far ahead. I'm just trying to, survive
Right.
this. And she said, just put it in the, on the back burner there, that there's going to be some angst. And, so sure enough, about 6 months after Trisha passes away, I'm facing, changes professionally that I didn't expect to make. And so, um, I got sober when I was 45, and by the time I was 55, I was in a completely new career, which was,
Mm,
I got my credentialing for doing the recovery work, counseling, and all of that.
yeah.
And I had joined a practice here in Brentwood, and started seeing clients, which I wasn't sure was going to happen. But I had some severance money from my departure from the church I worked in, and I used that to float me for the first year. And I thought, well, if nobody comes in the first year, then at least, I've survived for a year, and I'll go, to Home Depot and put on a vest or something. But I'm gonna, I'm gonna give it a try. This
Yeah.
is what I feel passionate about. And so, I think that sobriety gave me the courage to um, face those kinds of feelings without needing to drink at them. I was scared to death, but it didn't occur to me that I could drink at it or wanted to drink at it.
Yeah.
I did what everybody else does, and I worked hard and garnered support and networked and tried to find, the people who were doing what I wanted to do and learn from them, and all of that. But I changed careers at 55, and um, I I think that that's the biggest gift in all this as well, because I, for the first time, am um, it completely um, feeling at peace. And not every day is, a parade, but I
Yeah.
do, for the first time, feel like in these little areas of my life, I'm reconciled and I'm at peace. And I'm honestly working in a capacity that my paycheck isn't attached to the advice I give people, or the way that I don't
Yeah.
really give advice. I observe and ask questions, but the things that I encourage people to think about is not attached to a paycheck. I don't have to hold to a particular belief or
Hmm.
whatever in order to not get flack from people, or anything like that. And it's been a good shift, because I joined the Episcopal Church about 5 years ago, which was a shift for me. But for me, that fit my understanding of um, God, and all His inclusivity and love. And so I
Yeah.
wanted that. And so there's not much about my life today in this moment that resembles even the life I had 10 years ago, and
Mm,
then I got sober in 2005. And even in my sobriety, there was a lot of, I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's a lot of time where this reprocessing and reorienting and giving yourself permission to say things and admit things, that all takes time. That didn't happen for me
yeah.
in 30 days or 3 months. That all took a lot of time. And it's ongoing, I think. But that's kind of the how I got here part.
Yep. Can I ask you a personal question? Feel free to, pass on this if you want to. But, um, you know, a lot of us, when we get sober, when we were raised in the church, or really any religion for that matter, but I think especially the church, um, we go through this process of questioning, our whole worldview.
Hmm.
And many, 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 many of us come out on the other side agnostic, atheist,
Hmm.
um, you name it. And I'm curious if you could share with us how your relationship with God looks different in how it was preserved.
Hmm.
Because in many people's case, that's not what happens, and that's their choice. I'm not judging anybody. My experience is similar to yours. Like, I was raised in the church, and I was struggling to reconcile a lot of my belief system, and lots of things had to change. I had to reject some stuff that wasn't working for me. And, a lot of people on the outside go, what is this process you're talking about? Like, you can't do that. Like, God is who he is, you can't.
Yeah.
And, the funny thing I always bring up, I'm like, okay, so do you believe that if you're a Christian, do you believe that your Baptist brothers and sisters, and your Presbyterian brothers and sisters, and your Methodist brothers and sisters um, are your brothers and sisters? Like,
Yep.
do you believe that they're Christ followers and Christians as well?
Yeah.
Because they all have a different interpretation of the Bible and who God is to them.
Right.
So why can't we do that in recovery as
Hmm.
well, based on the way that he was presented from our parents?
Right.
And so that is such okay. Yes, a very, very personal question, but something so powerful that
Hmm.
I love to ask somebody in your position, because there are a lot of us that have gone down that road, or are
Yeah.
facing
Oh,
the
yeah.
beginning of that road.
No, I think that's a great thing, and I'm happy to weigh in on that. My uh, nutshell version of that question is, I think I really tried to be as agnostic as I could, and even atheist if I could muster it up at
Mm,
some point. But I couldn't. I couldn't not believe, and for whatever reasons that are in me. And but what I told people was, I said, I'm not an agnostic or atheist. I just believe in God, but I believe in a God that doesn't give a shit, and that's really harder than believing not believing. Because if I could muster up some atheism, I think I'd be more at peace, you know.
mm,
But I can't, for whatever reasons in me that I can't do that. But I have a belief that God is very indifferent, and that's a harder God for me to embrace than not believing. And
mm,
it was really through my time going up to see the monks that I got acquainted. Father Bennett told me one day, he said, if you don't believe in the God who weeps with you in the pain and the suffering that you guys are going through right now, then you don't believe in the God that is truly at work in the world, in his opinion. Because he said you must see God as empathetic and as a God who will weep with you, and not. He said, I think we all hang the wrongs and the ills of the world on God, and he said, I think that actually God's as pissed and angry and sad as we are. You know,
mm,
um, and so that was a turning point for me. To kind of um, because my anger, I think, with God as I understood him or her to be then, um, if that's who you think God is, then of course you're angry, you know, you know,
yep.
um, and uh, and when that shifted, that was a big shift for me on a lot of levels.
Mm. So did it shift? So you're saying now it shifted from that place of not caring necessarily and being a more absent God to being one that sits and weeps with you,
Mhm.
eh, or is that where you're
Yeah,
saying that you
yeah. I
landed?
mean, I
Okay.
I believe that God has the heart of empathy.
Yeah.
um, and that's also that makes it very much easier not to hold other people in judgment. you know
Yeah.
the work that I do every day and that you do every day, we see people that are hurting, and like all of us have made decisions and choices that haven't turned out so great, but
Hmm.
it was out of pain and trauma and shame and isolation and all those things that they came to those conclusions. And if God is weeping with me, then I got to weep with them. You know,
Yeah.
so
It's very well put. Um, well, wow. That I can tell you've told your story a few times. Um, that was really great to hear. I have a couple follow up questions for you. So, what's one of the, I guess, biggest surprises that you are experiencing as a result of your recovery today that you would have never imagined before you got sober?
Hmm. Wow, that's a really, I haven't thought about that. Well, one thing, I used to be paralyzed by what other people thought.
Hmm.
It not just a little uncomfortable. I mean, it was paralyzing to me.
Yeah.
Again, we were sort of raised in the idea that um, what other people thought did matter.
Yep.
That was your, you didn't do anything that would hurt your witness, quote unquote, which is just
Yep.
another way of saying, you're going to please people and be neurotic and angry. But the reality that I have grown in most, I think, is that my give a shitter is really like needs new batteries or something because it's not that I don't.
I think that's a blessing.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
that I don't care, and there's some things I'm still trying to be cautious about with respect to other people and their feelings, um, but I don't really care what how other people might interpret me. Um,
Yeah, what I hear you saying is like the ability to be purely and wholly vulnerable
mhm,
and not put up the walls that protected who you really are,
mhm.
have that those walls have all fallen down. You no longer feel the need for that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Because whether I take every, single detail of my life to a format like this or not, it
Hmm.
doesn't imply that in the mainstream of my world that I'm uh, paralyzed by other people's opinion of me.
Yeah.
So
I love that, and I can absolutely relate. One of the greatest gifts of recovery, for sure, if we let it.
yeah.
Um, and wow, so that leads me to my next question. So, what would you say are your, you know, on your crappiest day when you're thinking about, okay, why do I do recovery again? What
Hmm.
are my reasons? You weigh your pros and your cons.
Hmm.
What are your pros?
I have a relationship with my daughter. Um, she has two grandchildren. They're 3 and 15 months, two little boys. And there was a point when I was drinking that short story. My daughter invited a bunch of friends to our house for New Year's Eve, and she specifically asked me not to drink that night. I wasn't going anywhere, and I was going to be home, and Trisha was in bed, and she just didn't want me to drink.
Hmm.
Of course, I was offended that she would ask me that. Well, it's not like I've ever done anything embarrassing. Um, and
Not that you can remember,
exactly,
right?
I have to be told about it. But other than that,
Yeah.
um, and so she had her friends over. Things were rolling along. They were watching movies in the family room or whatever, and I was, this was getting to be 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, and I was starting to feel a little put upon. Why do I have to be sober on New Year's Eve? I'm already alone. I'm already by myself at this house. I'm already blah 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 blah. Poor me, all that. And so I thought, well, everybody's busy in the living room watching this movie. I'm going to just go in and pour something and take it to the back of the house with me. And so I did. I went in and I was making my usual deal, and Lauren happened to come around the corner of the kitchen, and she saw me standing there pouring this drink after
Mm.
I had promised her that I wouldn't. Um, and she just looked at me, And I don't know why that time particularly stuck with me in the little snapshot scrapbook of my
Mhm.
head, but there was a look that said, "I'm so hurt, I'm so disappointed, and I'm so angry." And if you could
Mhm.
roll that all into one expression, that's what came across her
Yep.
face. And then she just shook her head and closed her eyes and walked out of the room. And for whatever reason, and that was near the end for me, but that expression was something that I don't ever want to see again. You know,
Mm.
out of all the
Mhm.
unwanted outcomes that I've had, and I've had a bunch of dramatic stuff that would be real technicolor, to tell, like all of us, that was the one thing that I don't ever want to experience again. And so, even on my crappiest days, and I'm thinking, why am I doing this recovery thing? And certainly, helping other people get on this train. Um, I keep going back to the fact that, as bad as it is, I get to spend birthdays with my grandsons because my daughter doesn't um, mistrust me, or I get to have relationship with people that I love who would not have liked me very much by now. I'm pretty sure, you know. So
Hmm. I think those are some pretty good reasons.
yeah, well, they
Yep.
work for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right. Last question for you, David. What final word of encouragement would you like to leave for the person that's watching or listening today that's just really identifying with your story, and they're struggling?
Mm. I would like to tell anybody listening in on this and feeling like they identify with us, but they don't think this is going to work for them, or they've tried and blah blah blah, all the things people that we tell ourselves. I would say tell yourself the truth. Just tell yourself
Mm.
the truth first. At least admit that there's something broken here, there's something that's not working. um, Say it out loud to one person. You don't have to go, rush to meetings. You don't have to go um, announce it to anybody in groups. Just tell one person your truth. Say it out
Mm.
loud, because I believe when we say things out loud, they become real, and we have to deal with
Yes.
them. Father Bennett, again at the monastery, told me, he said, that's what's powerful about confessions. He said the reason Catholics do the confession thing the way they do is not just so that the priest can go make a case for them to God or whatever happens, but it's that this person says it out loud to a safe place, that
Yeah.
you have to hear it come out of yourself, and then it's real, and then you can
Yep.
decide what you're going to do with it from there. But at least you've admitted this, and that goes for, I mean, I have to practice that daily, because there's still stuff
Mhm.
I want to pretend isn't the way it is
Yeah.
in my life, and I have to.
Isn't that true? The number one, I think in most case scenarios, at least for me, the hardest person to confess the reality of my behavior to is myself.
Mhm. Yeah, because it goes against
Before
all that
anybody.
great PR we build up for ourselves that we
Yeah,
want to buy
yeah,
into, that we believe. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally.
so true. Great words and such a powerful story, David. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I really appreciate you uh, joining our space and letting us elevate your story. And for those of you watching or listening, I'm going to close out the way I always do and remind everyone that it is never too late to start loving yourself. And no matter what you're struggling with, if it's behavior pattern, addiction, process addiction, you name it, if it is interfering with your quality of life and your ability to live happy, joyous, and free, that you are only one decision away from a completely different life. And David simply put exactly how you can change that. So we're going to have resources, as always, in the show notes. If you need help, please reach out. All of David's David's info will be there too if you want to check his webpage out. So thanks again to all of you. And with that, we're out.
Thank you, Patrick.
For more information on today's episode, check out the show notes. Recovery Stories is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's Rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. Whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please share with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. We are grateful for you and hope that you have been encouraged by today's episode. As always, remember you are only one decision away from a completely different life, and it is never too late to start loving yourself.